Not very much. We're shattered with that. Is everyone left speechless, or do you have questions?
Yeah.
But right at the back. Yeah.
Just repeat the question.
If somebody's got a Geiger counter,
Yes.
has the radioactivity been measured anywhere around, that site?
Well, I mentioned ring of protection. Where actually the population of New York was warned for a hypothetical bomb terror attack, and in part of this operation they had the problem that too many false alarms with the Geiger counter were detected. False alarms because if you had a steroid treatment in the hospital, radioactive material, these things go off also. So they created a tightly knit net to control these counters. But of course, if you have a Geiger counter at your disposition, and if you go to the area where the solid is supposed to be radioactive, then you can measure it, of course, yes.
CBS 2's Tony Aiello gives us an exclusive look inside the ring of protection against dirty bombs.
One can imagine an enormous amount of disruption even if a very small dirty bomb were detonated.
To counter the danger, an unprecedented effort to equip first responders with radiation detectors. From the city to the suburbs.
So the concept is to create sort of a protective ring around the city with these detectors so that it can be determined whether or not there is a movement of radiological material towards New York or inside New York City.
There are detectors hidden in SUVs the NYPD parks around the city.
It's a passive screening. We don't stop them unless the detection equipment tells us to.
And on the belts of 4,000 first responders in 150 tri-state agencies, what looks like a pager is actually a personal radiation detector.
Okay, go and have another question. James.
Can you put a probability on the likelihood of the Israelis being behind the 9/11 attack?
What's the driving force? After all, you see the entire apparatus involved in this. And you may ask, where's the spiritual source? I could say 50-50. And I would never say that Israel has the whole responsibility for this operation. There are too many governmental organizations in the West involved, the entire industrial military complex. There's too much profit for the so-called West, or the Western elite.
Could I just add that Israel gained the nuclear capability through Lord Victor Rothschild, master spy in Britain. So it all comes back to London anyway.
Yeah.
Do you know of any other instant where they've used an atomic weapon to bring down a building? And I think that's important to know, because how could they be certain if they hadn't tried it with another high-rise building that it was going to behave in the way it did? Whereas we know with conventional means of controlled demolition, they know exactly how it's going to come down.
Yes. They knew exactly what they were doing, absolutely. The answer to your question is in old military films. Actually, I found a clip where they were trying to demolish structures from below.
We begin to bump into the precursor again. A truss bridge section 2,300 feet from zero. Shot 9, 26 KT, 2,400 feet high, produced a small permanent set in the top chord with an overpressure of 11.5 pounds per square inch. But the mock stem had not formed to reach the height of the bridge. 8.5 pounds did this on shot 10, 500 feet high, 15 kiloton yield, with a precursor blast wave and a mock stem already higher than the bridge.
Yes, sorry.
There's a fairly well-known witness statement of someone, in fact a group of people, who were in the basement of one of the Twin Towers, and he was amazed that when he came up upstairs from the basement, there was no rubble on top, and you could see through all broad daylight, and they just walked away. Now, if there was a nuclear bomb under here, he wouldn't have done that. Can you comment on that?
It was midday on 9/11, and in the chaos and confusion, Captain J. Jonas's Mayday messages were still not being received. The fireman had no idea there was a pocket of survivors nearby. Then Jay again tries to make radio contact. Unexpectedly, this time his call is picked up. The next thing the survivors remember is that down in the depths of Stairway B, the dust lifted, and it was as if another miracle had happened.
It was just clearly sunlight. Maybe it was about 12 inches wide, and it was all peppered with this dirt and debris and running through it. But it was the most beautiful sight in the world. It was almost hard to believe, this sunlight coming. I mean, this is a 110-story building fell down right on top of us, and I'm on the third floor looking at sunlight.
Can you comment on that?
Certainly. Well, you imagine that you are standing near to a machine gun pointing upwards. Pressure would go directly next to you, but it wouldn't hit you. So what I'm talking about is not the nuclear blast that if people got the nuclear blast, they would be killed immediately. But we have first this nuclear event of 75 meters below them, and then this magma chamber builds up the pressure, and then it's going to erupt, and it will use exactly the channel offered. Sometimes I use this picture of a
Which is the lift shaft.
Yes, yes.
Okay. All right.
Frank.
Yes, as an architect myself, I was persuaded by the logic of the architects and engineers' description, mainly on the grounds that nanothermite explodes, I gather, at about 2,500 degrees centigrade. What I was going to ask you was, do you know the temperature at which the mass of the plan of the building rose, to which it rose, because the size of those beams was so massive that 9/11 architects and engineers said, that it would have to be nanothermite to destroy the connections between the beams and the columns in order to get free fall. Now, what you've told us today has, of course, completely blown my mind away, and I'm now going to have to revise my whole take on this. But I am still persuaded that 11 and 12 seconds was approximately the time that it took for the buildings to fall within their own footprint. So that's what I'd like to be just confirmed and clarified. If you
yes,
can.
well, we have these signs, there are these beams which were indeed cut, and I believe they were cut by cutter charges indeed. So we have this destabilization of the entire structure to a very, very, weak situation. And then, if the building is already weakened, then you apply the final stroke, so to speak. But you have indeed the elements of architecture engineers are valid, with the exception of the last one.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have you examined data from any instrument that would measure seismic activity of the Earth? Because presumably that would show if a nuclear bomb had been detonated under the ground.
Generally, you can say that the registered shockwaves were surprisingly small for a nuclear weapon. For the South Tower magnitude 2.1, for the North Tower magnitude 2.3, and Building 7 magnitude 0.6. So we clearly had the energy decoupled from the ground, and the question is, how can this be achieved? First, this can be due to the ground itself, if it absorbs the shockwave sufficiently well due to the existence of tunnels, sand, water, or an existing underground rail system, which makes the ground look like a Swiss cheese. Second, you can use a so-called nuclear fissile device. Fissile devices have been tested both for fission and fusion, and they represent mainly an incomplete slow explosion. However, the confinement in the rock bed under the towers gives us additional possibilities. You could trigger, for example, a slow-burning hydrogen fusion process by igniting a first-stage uranium fission. This hydrogen fusion process could last longer than in a normal atmospheric H-bomb, as pressure and temperature in the rock bed remain focused in one singular point for several split seconds. Hypothetically, you could create a small sun releasing its energy inside the rock. All you need is sufficient hydrogen fuel, temperature and pressure to get the burn long enough.
Could I just ask about critical mass, where this comes in? Because the minimal mass of uranium, have they got over that minimum problem, or would this have been bigger than that?
As I've said before, in the Hiroshima device, they used 64 kilograms of uranium, of which less than 2 kilograms were actually consumed, creating a massive fallout. Today, we are in a sort of information trap because the fallout was minimal on 9/11. The military-industrial complex and its agents explain as always the technology of 1945, as if the most terrible weapons were not perfectioned and miniaturized already in 2001. You see, the critical mass of uranium-235 is 49 kilograms, resulting in a 10 kiloton yield at a burn rate of 3%. Already, by applying a neutron reflector, a simple 30 centimeters thick iron housing, critical mass is reduced to 17 kilograms. Today, the critical mass can be reduced further significantly. This is our hypothetical assumption, using additional artificial neutron radiation sources, using very efficient neutron reflectors, increasing the speed of compression, increasing the material's density, thus the power of compression, increasing the purity of the material, and optimizing the geometry. Now, this is a hypothetical figure, but with 250 grams of uranium and an increased burn rate to, say, 20%, the total amount of uranium-235 undergoing fission would be 50 grams. Further, these fissile materials would stay to 90% inside the pit. Yes, on basis of this calculation, 5 grams of highly radioactive fission material would escape into the dust cloud and contaminate the city to some degree, but these figures apply only for a sophisticated third-generation nuclear weapon with a miniaturized fission primary stage, which will trigger the much cleaner hydrogen fusion process, which would also need a very strong housing of boron-10 if you want to minimize neutron activation, as boron-10 absorbs neutrons like a sponge and transforms into the non-radioactive boron-11 isotope. It can be done.
Those video of the buildings, the two first towers collapsing, you can see in the ejected material, you can see large blocks of concrete and steel getting smaller and turning to dust and effervescing as they pass through space away from the building. Do you think that observation is something the nuclear hypothesis should address? And if so, how does it do it? Because speaking as a scientist, I think the hypothesis that doesn't address the observations is not very good.
I understand the question. So people have often the problem in understanding how steel can actually turn to dust. I'm just giving.
It melts, doesn't it? Didn't they find the obvious shockwaves?
No, we have two effects, of course. When a neutron interacts with the nucleus, we have extremely high temperatures, so everything evaporates. So the molecule evaporates to 2,600 degrees Celsius, iron melts, evaporates instantly. And but you have other effects. So you have, when the thermal energy is not sufficient to melt the steel, you have the radiation effects. So the crystal itself is destroyed. It's like breaking a glass pane. Only for iron, and it's very uncommon for our own, common day life, that iron turns to powder. But exactly these things can happen with this high radioactive input or radiation impulses. And this might also account for concrete or blocks of concrete becoming so brittle that they are in free fall, still friction and so on, disintegrating as part of the...
So it's the neutron fusion, dissipation, whatever, that actually blows everything to dust.
It's the resulting spectrum of additional radiation. So you have the interaction of the neutron with the atomic nuclei, and it's getting very much excited by this, and so it's sending out all sorts of radiation. And these can be destructive gamma radiation.
Can I ask, is there a possibility of nuclear fusion weapons rather than fission?
Well, yes, this is a possibility to make the weapon cleaner or more powerful. Most people think that an H-bomb is always a super powerful A-bomb. For example, the dome created by the H-bomb sedan with 100 kiloton yield rose to a height of nearly 100 meters before it vented 3 seconds after ignition. This would have lifted the entire WTC site up. But by using a modern, miniaturized weapon, you can as well have a small 1 kiloton detonation using a primary fission process for ignition of the secondary fusion stage. This is the comparison of the dimensions of a 1 kiloton detonation using ESS teapot for comparison. But in any case, if you want to minimize the residual radiation, you have to use an MRR device with a strong housing of boron-10 and efficient neutron reflectors. Otherwise, the neutron radiation would contaminate the environment due to neutron activation of other elements.
Well, the reason I ask is that Professor Stephen Jones, who wrote the first physics paper that I came across on it, that persuaded me that it wasn't the official story, wasn't possible. Apparently he was an expert in fusion, and I would expect him to have understood all this. It's only when I had an article published on this in the International Esperanto magazine, which was published in this country. And when it appeared, there was a big picture on the front cover, and it had this tilt at the top, and I thought, there's something wrong there. But he was an expert in nuclear fusion, so, and he was working, I think, with the Pentagon through his university.
Yes, but Jones is violently opposed to the nuclear theory. And when I wrote his statement, I didn't agree, I couldn't agree with him, because first he states that the building were not transformed into dust, but into big blocks only, which is evidently false. You can see the pictures. The dustification in the street is extreme. And then we have to understand the scope of the crime. If one professor 10 years ago made a measurement, and this measurement is the only reference point we have, he didn't find anything. This is a bit poor for sort of crime comparison. There should be a team of international physicists working on this, and multiple probes taken from here.
Okay, Paul. Yes.
I was just going to know, does anybody know actually how many people died, or is that about top secret?
Well, in the towers, I said this is the official number, about 3,000 people died, what I called it evaporated. There's a term, I think.
Sorry, how many thousands?
3,000 died instantly. But we have now already 5,000 more who died of cancers. 5,000 more are currently dying, and the official number for people who get treatment is 72,000. And, well, most likely the people who lived in the area one year ago, if they now contract cancer, they just don't get a connection. So I may say that 100,000 is...
Is it established that these cancers are caused by radiation?
No, you can say, okay, it's surprising that these cancers are extremely rare. So bone cancer, leukemia, brain cancer. But you cannot track down the cause definitely, because actually the site with the smoldering debris and with the stuff they inhale, not only ionizing radiation, but also the toxins, and the toxins can also cause cancer.
Oh, asbestos as well.
Well, whereas asbestos, we have these cancer waves. Asbestos will act in 20 years.
Nick?
You mentioned these caverns 70 metres or so below the towers where the nukes were placed, you surmise. I'm interested in when it's hollowed out by somebody, and also several floors below the towers, 5 floors, they go underground. Are you saying that it was dug 70 kilometres below the lowest floor, 70 metres, and placed the nukes there?
Yes.
Or are you not claiming to know anything about that?
Well, according to the drawings I did and the pressure wave, I think it was 75 meters, which we need for the pressure compensation. It is a fact, I must admit, that these caverns, which I'm showing shortly here, are only at 40 meters. But I try to explain this, that the whole system, when it was liquefied, rose a bit. So I'm just showing here for the photos which are taken from these caverns 50 meters below the surface. So these melting pots here, a small pot from the south tower, here the glass liquefied molten rock, here the liquefied structures, and here they're already pouring concrete to seal it off. But they did make a lot of detonations and breaking the rock to carry it away in order to, well, I think just the rock was contaminated, they wanted to move it. But at a certain point they started to pour this liquefied, this concrete to seal the floor. And they also pumped concrete into the hollow out shafts everywhere. So they got a relatively stable situation.
So whoever did this event had to burrow beneath the tower somehow?
Yes. I already said this. This is the information from Kalisov, that there was an underground tunnel communication system. I cannot say how deep it was. Or it is also the information that the destructive devices, or at least the placement, was prepared during construction. But the nukes itself, as they have limited lifetime, you should carry them out, prepare them, have fresh uranium, fissile and faithfully.
Okay.
Yes, as regards to cancer, one famous person has died, possibly as a result of all this, is Donna Summer, the pop singer. She died a few years ago, and she was a resident of Manhattan, so she may have been a victim of this situation. But about the secret societies, what are you implying that it's really an inner circle of people who are really responsible for this? We're talking about different nations and countries and governments involved, but right circle within circle within circle, it's an inner circle really what we're talking about.
What's on the very top?
Yes.
Well, that's a philosophical question. If you believe in the devil, then it is no need for the devil to exist in reality. You believe is enough. And I can't tell you what is behind it. At the very core. If it's good, you need something spiritual or alien of a supercomputer of some ages ago is working against the human race. I don't know.
But there's a small group of people.
It's getting smaller and smaller. It's getting weird.
Yeah. I think we have to clear the room by 10 o'clock. I'm not sure how to get out there. And also a little time to chat and to buy those books on the side. Oh, the money! Yes, okay. So anyone who's got a volunteer to
It's a lot of